What if there were 7 decisions, 1 to 7, that could literally transform our lives, transform our businesses? Well, there is. And I want to welcome you guys. I'm Robert here at our beautiful home in Texas on Lake Granbury. And it's really an honor and a privilege out of high respect for one of my key mentors in life. He's author, speaker, lecturer, faith-based man. He's amazing. And he wrote a book called The Traveler's Gift. And I have this on my wall. I'll show it to you on my next videos. It's a plaque. It's a big, like 3 foot long. It's about the 7 decisions that he discovered. His name is Andy Andrews, andyandrews.com. And at one time he was homeless. And he had a mentor come into his life and begin to pour into him a lot of wisdom. But he did that by sharing with him his favorite mentors in the form of books and lessons. Hey, Karen. And after long study and coming from homeless to being this global success story of changing lives, somewhere in that process, Andy realized there were kind of 7 pivotal decisions that all of us make in life, and that could really dramatically affect the direction and even the level of contribution, success, etc. in our lives and businesses. And I'm going to go through each decision and kind of share with you a personal story based on that decision. The first decision it's a big one. We've all heard it before, but Andy calls it the buck stops here. The buck stops here, meaning when we assume 100% responsibility for our lives, for our supposedly challenges, solutions to those, when we look inside versus outside for answers to solutions. And I'm going to share with you a journey. I've only told probably 2 individuals in my entire life this story, and I'm going to share it with my dad because it's around my scuba diving journey. One of the cardinal rules in scuba diving, if you're being safe and you're being smart actually, is to always dive with a buddy. Well, I began to dive as soon as I could get my certification back in the piney woods of Louisiana. That's where I grew up. A lot of my roots are there, obviously. And I got my C card at age 13, and I began to dive on a regular basis, and it's a passion I shared with my dad. And through the years, I have so many awesome memories of Dad and I diving in some of the rivers, the lakes, the creeks, and even now, later in life, in the Caribbean and different parts of the planet. But one of my stories, which I can feel the pain of and the relief of, and the borderline, not so much panic, but borderline realizing, after the fact I realized that I came very close to not being here with you guys, not being on this journey, and so many blessings. And so Dad and I had dove many times in the rivers back home, and when the rivers back home, they get crystal clear because, in some cases, because a lot of the rivers they're dammed up periodically and create these huge reservoirs. There's a big reservoir in Louisiana called Toledo Bend. It's a big, long lake. Literally, you can start at the dam and go all the way up to the head of the lake, and you would travel 65, 70 miles, whatever it is. It's a long journey, okay? By boat, you drive around it by car. But anyway, at the base of the power plant and the dam, the lake is a result of damming up. Hey, Evan, is damming up the Sabine River, and when they would run these power plants through the dam on the lake there, all through the week, generate tons of electricity for all the neighboring parishes. We call them parishes in Louisiana, not counties. Long story short, when they would cut off these, they would cut them off at 5 o'clock Friday after the peak pull is needed, and the river, the Sabine River in this case, would begin to calm down. It goes from flood and high current. We dove in some of those high current conditions. Wasn't the smartest thing. But when they would close the turbines off, the river would settle down several feet and get calm and become crystal clear. And it was ideal scuba diving. We would go in there with our lights and spearfish for catfish. And on one of those expeditions in the canoe, I think this time, yeah, I was in the canoe actually, and Dad couldn't go. Dad was at work, and I had a day off. I could go to the river, so I chose to go. My buddy couldn't go, so there I was diving by myself, and I put the boat in, and I paddled upstream about a mile or so, up to where one of our favorite log jams and some trees were, and I got in there, hopped off, shored the canoe, put my scuba gear on, put my wetsuit on. The water, even in Louisiana in the summer, is really, really cold because it comes from the bottom of the lake, which is the bottom of the thermocline. So I dove around and I speared a couple catfish, a couple blue cat, and I think there was one Opelousas, which is a more yellow cat. It's a bigger catfish. My fish were from 5 to 15, 20 pounds. And I dove around, and up until that time, I was probably about 16 years old. Dad had always taught me, son, always leave a certain amount of air in the tank. We always, as a scuba diver, you obviously have an air gauge. So you can periodically you check your air gauge to make sure that you have plenty of air and a reserve air. So you save the reserve, say for a safe dive, say it's 1,100 or 1,000 pounds you want reserved, and then you begin to come up. If you've been deep, you got to slowly decompress. But most of my diving in the lake there, Dad and I, was in shallow water, so you didn't have to decompress. So anyway, but I was 16, invulnerable, impervious, indestructible. Okay, so I dove around, speared 2 or 3 catfish, and kept monitoring my air. But man, then I got into an area where there was even more fish. So I speared another fish and another fish. I had a good stringer going, a good stringer of fish. You would get the fish and put it on the stringer, and I was enjoying the hunt. I looked at there. I went past 1,000 pounds, didn't go up. I kept spearing, looking for fish, swimming around to that next log, that next tree underwater, and that my air got 500 pounds. Oh, I got plenty of air. And the air, it began to taste, if you haven't experienced this, hopefully you'll never experience this as a diver, but the air began to taste a little metallic. It was some warning signs that, hey, and it began to get a little harder to get the air out because of lower pressure. It doesn't flow through the hose as much. But I kept looking around. Oh, there was a fish. I began to go up in there and hunt the fish. And before I could even get close to the fish, my regulator got really hard to breathe. And I said, some warning bells went off in my head and heart, say it's time to come up. And before I could back out of the place I was looking for fish, it was that sound that you never want to hear as a diver, where click. It was kind of an intake of breath and then a kind of a metallic click, and nothing was coming through my hose. And I was in about, fortunately I wasn't that deep, but what was crazy about it in that circumstance, when I was under the tree that had fell into the water. Okay, so it was a big, probably when it was on land, maybe 50 feet tall. So the tree had all kinds of branches, etc., out from it. And there I was, only 25 feet, might have been close to 28, almost 30, but I was up under this tree that had fell over into the river. So, quick, my air went out. And as I began to, I said, I got to get air. And as I began to come up, I was stopped by one of the branches, and I wiggled my way around it, went to the next branch, and I was really, I didn't have time to prepare, so I didn't get a big breath in before my air went out. I went way past the danger zone into the place you never want to go as a diver again, totally out of air. So, and then I went over here, and another branch I had to wiggle around, and I was getting shallower, but I was at about 15 feet or so. I said, fortunately, the branches were getting thinner. So, and my air was, I was screaming for air, okay? And then I began to kick with all my might. And fortunately, the last 2 or 3 branches that could have stopped me or grabbed one of my air hoses or whatever, just kind of snapped off. So as I went up that last 15 or so feet, and you do get a little faster coming up, which wasn't the smart thing too. The other cardinal rule was you never go up faster than your bubbles. But at that point, I was even Didn't even think about the bubbles. Okay, all I needed to get that desperate breath of air. So fortunately, in this circumstance, the last 3 or 4 branches just kind of were small enough to snap off. And when I popped out on the surface, got that big breath of air, you know, and I inflated my my BC, my vest there. I kind of swum around, and the adrenaline stayed with me, but I realized that, you know, Robert, you know, you came. So at that point, 16 years ago, it was a passing thought that I came close to not being here, to drowning. But now, looking back and many dives later, I realized, hey, Robin, that it was definitely, I came close to drowning. And how it ties in the first decision is the buck truly stopped there. Part of the scenario was taking 100% responsibility. In this case, taking 100% responsibility was every dive from that point on. When I got to the surface, I always had 500 pounds left. And when I'm ocean diving, I always started coming up when I had 1,000 pounds left in my tank. But I just wanted to share that story, which I'll never forget. And that story, although it was a near drowning experience, obviously, it really, the flip side of that is one of my mentors says, when you fall or have a major snafu or mistake you make, take something up on the way up. So what I took on the way up after that near drowning experience was, number one, obviously be proactive. Number two, definitely assume take responsibility, and you make a decision. Because I was at another dive off the coast of Roatan with my family, and there was a gentleman there literally diving with his son who just got I think it was only 13 or 14, quite young, and the guy was kind of rash, we noticed that, but on, I think it was like the 4th or 5th dive of the series of dives we did it as a family and with the group, he ran out of air at about 70 feet in the ocean. So fortunately, one of the other instructors was there, and his son was there. He had to buddy breathe with his son, and then they began to buddy breathe where you swap hoses with one of the instructors, and they went on up, and actually he didn't make any more dives the rest of the trip. But it was, he just, again, it goes back to this number one rule of the 7 decisions, is that he really didn't assume really personal responsibility for he and his son by making rash decisions. So here's my question in closing, guys. Number one, I want you to think about this, and I think about the same thing periodically, is there one area, what's one area in, say, your business endeavor that you are more prone, when it comes up, to look outside yourself for why it's happening? Why me? Okay, so what possibly does that, what area of your business or your personal life does that flare its head sometime? And then next time it comes up, instead of thinking, why me, why don't they do that, what did my company do that, what did my upline, my business partner, why can't they do that? Turn that around, assume this number one decision, the buck stops here, okay, and ask yourself the question, why not me? And how can I resolve this challenge and go right and work through it, versus looking outside ourselves. So when we fully embrace assuming 100% responsibility and the consequence or the results of our actions, and look outside ourselves look inside ourselves for solutions versus outside, it radically changes everything about our business, much less our personal life. And definitely when it comes to my near-death experience with my scuba diving, then that irrational and irresponsible decision, fortunately I was able to take that and apply it in all the rest of my dives, even future dives, and that can apply to so many aspects. So I hope that story helped you. But again, when we assume 100% responsibility, the buck stops here, it frees us up. God bless you. Have a great day. Love to get your comments or questions below. And again, what is that one area that our imposter typically, when it comes up in our business and personal life, we tend to look outside ourselves, versus How can we turn that around and say, okay, how am I going to solve this? Okay, that's the question to ask. Have an amazing day. You deserve it.